Whenever I think of Ponyville, it seems like a wonderful example of a very happy, tight-knit, and growing community. You don't see many of the normal problems that you would expect to see in a town. Of course, you do see many abnormal problems. An infestation of parasprites eating everything in sight. Discord making Ponyville into the chaos capital of the world. Half the town rioting over an enchanted doll. A full-grown dragon wreaking havoc on the buildings. Even a revenge-driven, power-hungry stage performer wanting to remake the town in her own image. Certainly not the problems that you'd see in a normal town, but it makes for some very interesting stories. But as far as normal problems, they seem to be few and far between. You see the entire town taking part in winter wrap-up and working together to welcome spring. You see all the Pegasi in Ponyville joining together to help the Cloudsdale Weather Factory. You see the citizens go along with Twilight about how wonderful it is to live in Ponyville. Indeed, the city of Ponyville seems to be quite the ideal place to live. But there are a few things here and there that seemed rather puzzling about life in Ponyville. If you put aside all of the happiness, you may start to notice some things that don't appear to add up. Like the fact that even though the main six seem rather young, they all seem to be independent and even living on their own. Now in some cases, this does make a lot of sense. With Twilight Sparkle being personally mentored by Princess Celestia, it would be reasonable to assume that she would be granted the Ponyville Library with no questions asked, and probably even given a stipend from the Royal Treasury to live on. For Applejack, their farm has been in their family for many years, and she lives with the rest of her family there. Even with Pinkie Pie, we know that she is an apprentice baker for the cakes, and it doesn't sound unreasonable that they would also rent her a room upstairs at Sugar Cube Corner. But with Fluttershy, Rarity, and Rainbow Dash, it starts to get a little bit more difficult to understand. Each of them had their own home even before Twilight came to Ponyville, so we have to assume that they were able to achieve this independence on their own, without any assistance from the princess since they were not the elements of harmony yet. Each of them did have a job. Rainbow Dash is the weather manager, Fluttershy takes care of the wildlife, and Rarity is single-handedly running the Carousel Boutique. Considering how young each of them are, I find it a little odd that they are all living on their own. For a long time, many fans of MLP, including myself, just assumed that this was the norm for Ponyville, or even the norm for all of Equestria. But then I asked myself, what if this isn't the norm for Equestria? What if Ponyville really is the exception? But if Ponyville really is unlike the rest of Equestria, how did it come to be that way? The only other city we see a lot of in MLP is the equestrian capital of Canterlot, and for the most part, the ponies that we see there are of the upper class variety, who seem to be very well off and live rather lavishly. And this actually makes a lot of sense, considering that this is the city where the ruling class lives. Being the capital, there are all kinds of reasons for wealth to flow in and out of the city. And it also seems that most of these high society ponies are a fair bit older than any of the main six. But this is not the case with Ponyville. Ponyville doesn't seem to have much reason for any large amount of wealth to be flowing through it, right? All of the main six seem to be doing quite well for themselves here in Ponyville. And while it does make sense for one half of the six, it doesn't make as much sense for the other half. You could argue that their jobs are just so necessary for the city that they are able to make more than enough to support themselves. But in order for that to work, Ponyville would have to have ample amounts of money in their budget. I had trouble believing that a small city like Ponyville really has all this extra money flowing around to spend that much on weather management and wildlife care, as well as all of the normal expenses that come with running a city. But then again, what if they did? Currency in Equestria seems to go up and down in value, depending on which episode you are watching. You have the standard currency of bits, but you also see ponies accepting gems for payments. And this is where it gets confusing, trying to compare the two. You have one episode where Pinkie is emptying a bag of bits for a couple dozen drinks of cider. And then you have another episode where Trixie is able to get her hooves on an incredibly powerful magical artifact, also in exchange for a bag of bits, which seems like a very similar amount to what Pinkie used. And then when you look at gems, you see one being given to cover the cost of a cart full of donuts, and a smaller gem being used to buy an industrial strength dryer for a dog. Considering how many gems Spike can eat in one sitting, you'd have to wonder just how much he could buy with those gems if he could skip a meal every now and then. There seems to be at least some inconsistency here. But there is only an inconsistency if you assume that these trades are the standard all over Equestria. What if both bits and gems aren't nearly as valuable in Ponyville as they are in the rest of Equestria? Considering the examples that we've seen, this does seem to be the case. But what reason could there be for these vast differences? What if I was to tell you that Ponyville does have a reason to be a wealthy town, and it all comes back to one pony with one skill? The element of generosity herself, Miss Rarity. Considering how many gems we've seen throughout the series, we may have just assumed that gems are rather commonplace in Equestria. But what if they aren't? What if it is just as difficult to find gems in Equestria as it is in our world? And then, what if there was a little filly who discovered she had a natural talent in finding gems? All of a sudden, it would be just like what happens to a small town when a large gold deposit is discovered nearby. A large amount of wealth would be flowing in and out of that town. But this is even more unique due to the fact that Rarity is the only pony we've seen with this gift for locating gems. And that gift would provide an ample supply of a valuable material that would spread to all corners of Equestria, and more specifically, the very wealthy equestrian capital of Canterlot. We have seen examples of high society ponies from Canterlot making their way to Ponyville just to have dealings with Rarity. And this may have been the case even before Twilight came to Ponyville. Before Rarity discovered her natural talent, there didn't seem to be any reason for Ponyville to be much more than just a small town surrounded by farming communities. But with Rarity being part of the town, I can imagine a great deal of citywide growth over the course of just a few years. When you think about how wonderful it is in Ponyville and compare it to this theory, you may start to realize yet another reason why Rarity is the element of generosity. Her gift for finding gems is for more than just adding flair to dresses. Her gift is also the main reason why Ponyville has the money to spend on weather management, wildlife care, and even rebuilding their homes after a parasprite infestation or a dragon rampage. Or you could even just think about how many times the Apple family has had to rebuild their barn. I know that I am speculating quite a bit here, but when you start to compare how wealthy Ponyville seems in respect to other towns, it really starts to make a lot of sense. How Spike is able to consume a large amount of gems in one sitting without Twilight going bankrupt. How Pinky, as an apprentice baker, is able to come up with a large bag of bits just to spend on cider. How Rainbow Dash and Fluttershy are able to make enough money to live on their own at such a young age. It all seems to come back to Rarity and her natural talent in finding gems. Of course, I could be wrong. There could be other legitimate reasons for all these things. But when I look at some of the inconsistencies in MLP, this theory actually brings it all together rather reasonably. And at the same time, it gives us another reason to appreciate Rarity's role in Ponyville. What do you think? Is Ponyville the standard or the exception when compared to the rest of Equestria? I'd like to hear your thoughts about this theory, or perhaps you have a different theory that might explain these inconsistencies. I am Dr. Wolf, and I look forward to hearing from you.